At 6:22 p.m., the conference room still smelled of burnt espresso and expensive cologne when the COO leaned back like a king ending a trial. Nobody noticed the quiet woman near the window, forwarding one forgotten document to Board Counsel, until Dawn turned a $74 million share transfer into corporate ash. The rain arrived sideways that evening, streaking silver across the glass walls of Blackmere Capital like nervous handwriting. Inside the 32nd floor boardroom, the air felt heavier than the storm outside. Too many tailored jackets, too many polished smiles hiding sharpened teeth, the kind of room where people spoke softly because the real violence happened in spreadsheets and signatures. Elena Vale sat near the end of the conference table with a leather folder closed neatly in front of her. No dramatic gestures, no interruptions, just silence so controlled it almost looked graceful. Across from her, Martin Kessler, the COO with cufflinks that probably cost more than someone's monthly rent, drummed his fingers against the walnut table while the acquisition deck glowed behind him. "Timing matters," Martin said smoothly, pacing near the screen, "and hesitation kills leverage." Several executives nodded immediately, like flowers turning toward sunlight. Elena noticed that too. In companies like Blackmere, agreement spread faster than truth. The proposed share transfer had consumed the building for weeks, $74 million shifting through layered entities and offshore holding structures wrapped in enough legal language to suffocate suspicion. Officially, it was strategic restructuring. Unofficially, it smelled like smoke behind locked doors. Elena had smelled it 3 weeks ago. That was when the numbers stopped behaving naturally. At first, it was subtle. A delayed filing, a revised authorization sequence. Signature authority quietly rerouted through temporary approvals that no one discussed aloud. Tiny fractures hidden beneath polished marble. Most executives ignored details once bonuses were attached to outcomes. Elena did not, because Elena had spent 12 years cleaning disasters created by men who believed confidence could replace procedure. Outside, thunder rolled across the city. Inside, Martin smiled like someone already celebrating victory. "The family decides who stays," he said casually at 1822, loosening his tie as nervous laughter fluttered around the table. The sentence landed softly, too softly, but Elena felt the room change, not because of the words themselves, because of who looked down afterward. 2 directors suddenly became fascinated with their phones. One legal associate froze mid-note. Even Gregory Shaw, the aging chairman whose silver hair made him resemble an exhausted lion, shifted uncomfortably in his chair. That was the moment Elena understood something dangerous. This wasn't pressure, this was coordination, and somehow she had become the final obstacle. She folded her hands calmly. "Has Board Counsel reviewed the revised authorization chain?" Martin barely looked at her. "Legals aligned." Not an answer, just confidence wearing a tailored suit. A flicker crossed Gregory's face, tiny, almost invisible, but Elena caught it anyway. Fear looked strange on powerful people, like seeing cracks inside cathedral glass. The presentation resumed, numbers climbed, projected returns flashed across the screen. Words like efficiency, transition strategy, accelerated liquidity repeated in elegant corporate rhythm, while assistants quietly refilled water glasses nobody touched. Elena listened carefully, but her attention kept drifting toward one line in the internal approval appendix. Version 11.2, not 11.1. Someone had inserted changes after final circulation. Her pulse slowed instead of quickening. That always happened when things became serious. Other people panicked loudly. Elena became quieter, which frightened the right people. 2 seats away, junior counsel Naomi kept adjusting her bracelet nervously. Elena remembered Naomi from compliance review meetings, smart, overworked, too honest for executive politics. Their eyes met briefly. Naomi looked away first. That alone confirmed enough. The meeting stretched another 40 minutes beneath the hum of recessed lights and restrained ambition. By the end, signatures were expected before morning. The transfer would clear internationally at opening bell. Martin closed the presentation with the confidence of a man already spending future money. Any final concerns? Silence. Gregory avoided Elena's eyes. The CFO suddenly needed to answer a text message, and the storm outside pressed harder against the windows, like the building itself was warning them. Elena opened her folder at last. Inside rested a single document. The Shareholder Protection Addendum, signed 18 months earlier during a brutal succession negotiation everyone preferred to forget. Most executives treated it like archived insurance paperwork, buried, irrelevant, except it wasn't. Clause 8C required her direct authorization for any transfer affecting protected voting blocks connected to legacy family shares. Without her signature, the transaction could not legally close. Someone had tried to bypass that reality by altering internal routing authority, which meant someone inside the company believed procedure could be rewritten quietly if enough people stayed silent. Martin watched her now with measured impatience. "Elena?" She slid the document back into the folder. "No concerns?" she said gently. That surprised him, she could tell. He had prepared for resistance, prepared for debate, maybe even prepared to humiliate her publicly. But calm, unnerved, arrogant people more than anger ever could. The meeting dissolved slowly after that. Chairs scraped across the floor, assistants gathered printouts, expensive watches glimmered beneath cold lighting, while conversations restarted in cautious fragments. Martin stopped beside her as others exited. "You know," he said quietly, "companies survive because certain people understand when to step aside." His reflection hovered beside hers in the dark window, one sharp silhouette beside another. Elena smiled politely. "And others collapse," she replied, "because certain people mistake silence for permission." For the first time all evening, his expression tightened. Just slightly. Enough. By 1911, most of the executive floor had emptied. Cleaning staff moved through hallways carrying quiet exhaustion in rolling carts. The storm softened into steady rain tapping against the glass like patient fingers. Elena remained alone in her office with only a desk lamp glowing amber against the dark. The city below looked submerged. She removed her heels, rubbed one temple, and reopened the addendum. Every page smelled faintly of paper dust and old negotiations. Naomi's name appeared twice in metadata review logs from version 11.2. Elena stared at it for several seconds. Then her phone buzzed. Unknown number. She answered silently, breathing on the other end. Then a whisper. "They already initiated pre-clearance?" The line disconnected. No name, no explanation, but Elena recognized Naomi's voice anyway, and suddenly the room felt colder, because pre-clearance meant the share transfer machinery was already moving before official approval finalized, which meant this wasn't merely aggressive timing, it was desperation. Elena stood slowly and walked toward the window overlooking the rain-soaked financial district. Somewhere below, headlights smeared gold across flooded streets, while millions of dollars continued moving through invisible channels designed by people who believed complexity erased accountability. They were wrong. At 20:03, she opened a fresh email addressed to Board Counsel. Subject line, urgent, protected share authorization conflict. She attached the signed addendum. No dramatic speech, no threats, no accusations, just documents, just timestamps, just the quiet sound of procedure turning against the people who underestimated it. Before sending, Elena paused briefly. Then she added one final sentence. "Please confirm whether current transfer authorization complies with Clause 8C requirements regarding signature authority." Nothing emotional. That made it lethal. She pressed send. Outside, lightning flashed across the skyline like a camera exposing hidden faces. And somewhere else in the building, a phone probably started ringing. A phone someone wished had stayed silent. What Martin Kessler didn't know yet was that the most dangerous people in corporate wars were never the loudest ones. They were the ones who kept records. And by morning, someone inside Blackmere Capital was going to realize the deal they celebrated all evening had just stepped onto very thin ice. You'll want to see who panics first when Board Counsel finally opens the attachment. At 5:40 a.m., Blackmere Capital looked almost innocent. The lobby lights glowed softly against polished stone. Security guards traded quiet greetings beside bronze sculptures no employee truly noticed anymore. Outside, dawn crawled slowly across the wet streets, turning the city pale blue beneath low clouds. From a distance, the headquarters resembled stability itself. Inside, panic had already begun. Elena stepped out of the elevator carrying coffee and a calm expression sharpened by exhaustion. The executive floor was never this crowded before sunrise, unless something terrible had happened. Assistants whispered near reception. Phones rang unanswered. Two compliance officers hurried past carrying printed binders like emergency medics transporting blood. Nobody greeted her. That alone told her the email had landed exactly where it needed to. She crossed the hallway toward her office, heels clicking softly against marble, when Naomi appeared from around the corner, looking like she hadn't slept at all. Her mascara had surrendered sometime around midnight, leaving faint shadows beneath anxious eyes. "You shouldn't be here yet," Naomi whispered. Elena stopped. "That bad?" Naomi gave a nervous laugh without humor. Board Counsel froze the transfer at 03:12. For one brief second, even the hallway seemed quieter. Elena took a slow sip of coffee, warm, bitter, predictable, unlike the building around her. "Officially?" she asked. Naomi nodded quickly. "Internal emergency review. All movement suspended pending signature authority verification." There it was, the phrase now poisoning every executive inbox in the company. Signature authority, the two words arrogant people always ignored until they suddenly controlled everything. Down the corridor, voices erupted behind closed glass doors. Sharp, fast, defensive, Martin. Even muffled through walls, Elena recognized the rhythm of his anger. Not explosive rage, he was too disciplined for that. This was worse. Controlled fury, the kind that tightened every sentence until it sounded dangerous. Naomi stepped closer. "He's saying you deliberately delayed disclosure." Elena almost smiled. "Did he mention the altered authorization chain?" Silence answered first. Then Naomi looked away. And that was answer enough. The executive floor smelled faintly of printer toner and expensive panic. Screens glowed everywhere. Legal teams moved room to room with tablets and sealed folders, while senior staff suddenly rediscovered the importance of written approvals. Funny how ethics returned the moment money became endangered. Elena entered her office and placed her coffee beside the monitor. Overnight, she had received 43 emails, 27 marked urgent. 3 from external counsel, 1 from Gregory Shaw himself. She opened his message first. "We need to speak before the board convenes." No greeting, no signature, just tension compressed into 7 words. Outside her office window, helicopters drifted above downtown towers like slow mechanical birds. Rain still clung to the glass in trembling lines. The city looked exhausted already, and the market hadn't even opened yet. Her screen flashed again. "Incoming call, Martin Kessler." Elena let it ring twice before answering. "Good morning," she said evenly. "You went outside protocol." His voice arrived cold enough to frost steel. "No," Elena replied. "I followed protocol. That seems to be the issue." Silence. Not empty silence. Dangerous silence. Somewhere in the background, she heard another voice speaking rapidly, then papers slamming onto a table. Martin lowered his tone. "Do you understand what happens if this deal collapses publicly?" She leaned back slowly in her chair. "Do you?" That hit harder than accusation, because the problem wasn't merely the frozen share transfer anymore, it was exposure. If regulators examined the authorization revisions too closely, they would start asking why version 11.2 existed at all. Why approval sequencing changed after circulation? Why internal review logs suddenly disappeared for 17 minutes yesterday evening? And once questions begin inside corporations, loyalty evaporates faster than perfume in rain. Martin exhaled sharply. You're making enemies you can't afford. Elena's gaze drifted toward the skyline beyond the glass. Clouds hung low over the city like bruises. No, she said quietly. I'm documenting the ones I already have. He disconnected immediately, not because he won, because he lost control first. At 7:05, the emergency board session began. The conference room looked different in daylight, less theatrical, more dangerous. Morning stripped glamour away from powerful people, exposing fatigue beneath tailored perfection. Gregory Shaw sat at the center of the table, gripping reading glasses he never wore unless deeply stressed. Martin stood near the presentation screen, jaw rigid enough to crack stone. Around them, directors murmured carefully, while outside counsel prepared documents in tense silence. When Elena entered, conversation stopped. Not dramatically, worse, instantly. Gregory cleared his throat. Please sit. No one touched the catered breakfast arranged untouched near the sideboard. Croissants hardened quietly beside silver coffee urns, while $74 million remained frozen in procedural limbo. One attorney adjusted his glasses. Board Counsel has determined the current authorization structure may conflict with protections established under the Shareholder Protection Addendum signed May 14th, 18 months prior. May conflict. Legal language always wore soft shoes before carrying knives. Martin stepped forward immediately. The addendum was never intended to obstruct operational restructuring. Elena folded her hands calmly. Intent does not override execution. Another silence. Sharper this time. The attorney continued carefully. Until signature authority compliance is confirmed, transfer execution cannot proceed. Cannot proceed, 3 words. That was all it took to halt months of maneuvering. Martin's restraint finally cracked at the edges. With respect, this interpretation emerged less than 6 hours before execution. That timing is not accidental. Everyone looked at Elena, but she noticed something else instead. Gregory wouldn't look at Martin anymore? Interesting, very interesting, because men like Gregory Shaw survived decades in finance by sensing collapse before others smelled smoke. And right now, the chairman looked less concerned about delay than discovery. Elena opened her folder slowly. Inside sat printed metadata logs, version timestamps, authorization revisions, internal routing adjustments. She placed them gently on the table. No theatrics, just evidence. The room changed temperature almost instantly. One director removed his glasses. Another stopped taking notes entirely. Even outside counsel leaned forward now with the stillness of predators hearing movement in tall grass. Martin glanced down at the pages once, then twice. Color drained from his face so subtly most people would miss it. Elena did not. These revisions, she said softly, appear to modify protected voting procedures after circulation approval. Nobody interrupted, because everyone suddenly understood the danger. This was no longer a dispute over timing. It was becoming a question of liability. And liability inside executive boardrooms spread like gasoline across polished floors. Gregory finally spoke. Who authorized version 11.2? No one answered immediately. The silence stretched too long. That was the answer. Outside, thunder rolled faintly beyond the windows, although the storm itself had already passed. The city below continued moving normally, taxis, commuters, opening bells, completely unaware that several careers were quietly approaching the edge of a cliff 32 floors above them. Martin straightened his cuffs with deliberate precision. A procedural acceleration occurred, he said carefully. Nothing improper? The attorney beside Gregory looked unimpressed. Procedural acceleration, he repeated slowly, is not a recognized legal standard. A few people lowered their eyes after that. Elena almost pitied them. Almost, because fear inside corporate hierarchies behaved like winter frost. The moment one branch cracked, everyone listened for the next one. Then Naomi entered unexpectedly carrying another folder. Her hands trembled. Apologies. she said quietly. Additional archive logs were recovered from backup servers this morning. Recovered? Such an innocent word. Martin turned toward her too quickly, and in that instant, everyone in the room saw it. Not confidence, not authority, fear, tiny, flashing, human, but impossible to hide once revealed. Naomi handed the documents directly to Board Counsel instead of Martin. That choice alone echoed louder than any accusation. The attorney opened the folder carefully. His expression changed after the second page, then the third. Gregory removed his glasses entirely now, rubbing one hand across his face like a man suddenly feeling his age. Elena remained perfectly still. The room no longer belonged to the loudest voice. It belonged to the documents. And documents, unlike executives, rarely panicked. Outside the boardroom glass, employees had started gathering discreetly near reception, pretending not to watch. Rumors already moved through Blackmere Capital faster than elevator doors. Frozen transfer, emergency review, board counsel intervention, missing authorization chain. People sensed blood in the water even without knowing whose. The attorney closed the folder at last. His voice arrived measured and cold. Until further review, all transfer activity remained suspended, effective immediately. Martin said nothing, which frightened the room more than shouting would have, because powerful men became most dangerous precisely when they stopped speaking. And Elena suddenly realized something else. This wasn't over, not even close. Someone had altered corporate records believing no one would notice. Now the records were beginning to talk back. And the next thing uncovered inside those backup logs might destroy far more than a single deal. Once the board sees the deleted approval trail, someone in that room will understand the floor beneath them is already collapsing. What would you do if one signature could stop a $74 million deal overnight? Share your thoughts below and don't forget to follow for the next chapter. By 10:18 a.m., the entire executive floor had developed the strange stillness of an airport after canceled flights. Nobody relaxed, nobody left. People simply moved slower, speaking in lowered voices while pretending the building still operated normally. Assistants carried folders without making eye contact. Department heads refreshed inboxes every 30 seconds. Even the espresso machines near reception seemed quieter, as though the machinery itself understood something expensive was breaking upstairs. Elena stood near the window outside Conference Room B, watching rainwater slide down the glass in crooked silver lines. The storm had finally weakened, leaving the city wrapped in a dull gray light that flattened every skyscraper into cold geometry. Her phone vibrated again. Unknown number. Second time in less than 12 hours. She answered carefully. No greeting came, only a male voice, low and hurried. Check the archived Treasury approvals from March? Then the call disconnected. Elena stared at the dark screen for several seconds. March. Not yesterday. Not version 11.2. March. A chill crept slowly through her shoulders, because that meant the current share transfer issue might not be the beginning of the scheme, only the moment it failed. Behind her, Conference Room B erupted briefly with muffled arguing before the doors opened hard enough to rattle the glass walls. Martin emerged first, expression carved from pure restraint. Two attorneys followed, carrying binders against their chests like shields. When Martin noticed Elena standing nearby, he slowed. For one suspended second, the hallway felt almost theatrical. Gray skies beyond the windows, fluorescent reflections across polished floors, tension sharp enough to leave marks on skin. "You're enjoying this more than you should," he said quietly. Elena tilted her head slightly. "Enjoying what? Compliance?" His jaw tightened. That subtle irony irritated him more than open hostility ever could. People like Martin understood aggression. They built careers around it, but calm professionalism, documentation, procedure, those things cornered executives in ways charisma never could. He stepped closer. "You think the board will protect you?" "I think the board protects itself." The answer landed precisely where she intended, because corporations rarely operated on morality, only survival, and survival had suddenly changed sides. Martin's gaze hardened. Be careful whose panic you mistake for weakness. Then he walked away without another word, disappearing down the corridor while assistants immediately scattered from his path, like birds sensing weather pressure. Elena watched him go, not frightened, concerned. There was a difference. Powerful people rarely collapsed alone. At 11:07, Elena entered the archive review room beside internal audit, where stale air and overworked servers created the atmosphere of a bunker during wartime. Fluorescent lights buzzed faintly overhead. Half-empty coffee cups crowded desks beside legal pads, filled with frantic handwriting. Naomi sat in front of 3 monitors, wearing the exhausted expression of someone regretting every ambitious career decision she'd ever made. "You came?" Naomi whispered. "You sounded terrified." "I am." That honesty made Elena trust her more. On the central monitor, approval logs scrolled endlessly across the screen. Dates, timestamps, access chains, routing modifications. Most people would see meaningless corporate noise. Elena saw fingerprints. Naomi enlarged one section. "There," she said quietly. March 14th. Treasury authorization override, temporary routing reassignment, executive acceleration privileges enabled. Elena's eyes narrowed. This was never disclosed to compliance. Naomi shook her head, because it was deleted 4 hours later. Deleted. Another innocent word hiding ugly intentions. Rain tapped softly against distant windows, while the servers hummed around them like restrained electricity. Elena leaned closer to the monitor. The override authorization originated from an executive terminal, but not Martin's, Gregory Shaw. For the first time all morning, genuine surprise crossed Elena's face. Naomi noticed immediately. "You didn't know?" "No?" And suddenly, several pieces shifted inside her mind at once. Gregory's silence during the board meeting, his refusal to challenge Martin directly, the fear behind his eyes when version 11.2 surfaced. This wasn't merely a reckless COO manipulating approvals. The chairman himself had touched the process months earlier, which meant either Gregory participated willingly or someone used his authority without permission. Both possibilities were catastrophic. Elena sat back slowly. Outside the archive room, footsteps hurried past, accompanied by hushed conversations and distant ringing phones. Blackmere Capital sounded less like a financial institution now and more like a luxury hotel quietly discovering structural cracks beneath its foundation. Naomi swallowed hard. There's more. Of course there was. There was always more. She opened another folder containing recovered email fragments. Most were incomplete due to deletion cycles, but one subject line remained fully intact. RE Signature Authority Contingency. Elena felt the room sharpen around her. "Open it." Naomi hesitated. "Legal hasn't cleared." "Open it." The fragment loaded slowly. Only portions survived. "Cannot risk Vale reviewing final structure." Gregory reluctant but understands timeline pressure. Temporary authority reassignment until execution complete. No signature remained attached, but they both recognized the writing style instantly. Martin. Naomi leaned back, pale beneath the monitor glow. "I shouldn't have shown you this." "No," Elena replied softly. "You absolutely should have." Because now the shape of the situation finally emerged from the fog. This had never been improvisation, it had been preparation. Months of quiet adjustments hidden beneath ordinary administrative processes. Small enough individually to avoid attention. Dangerous only when assembled together, like pieces of broken glass forming a blade. And Elena had interrupted execution hours before completion. No wonder panic spread so quickly. A sharp knock interrupted the room. Both women looked up instantly. One of Gregory's executive aides stood outside the glass door. "Ms. Vale," he said carefully, "the chairman requests your presence immediately." "Not asks, requests," Subtle difference. Important difference. Naomi looked terrified again. Elena? It's fine. But even she wasn't entirely certain that was true anymore. The walk to Gregory's private office felt unusually long. Employees lowered their voices when she passed. Some avoided eye contact completely. Others stared openly now, curiosity overcoming caution. Rumors had evolved beyond speculation. People sensed an internal war, and corporate employees loved nothing more than watching untouchable executives suddenly bleed. Gregory's office overlooked the river on the east side of downtown. Normally, the view felt commanding. Today, beneath heavy clouds and rain-streaked glass, it resembled the deck of a ship drifting toward rocks. The chairman stood beside the window with his hands clasped behind his back. Older than yesterday. That was Elena's first thought. Not weaker, just tired in a way expensive tailoring couldn't hide. He didn't turn immediately when she entered. For 12 years, Gregory said quietly, I believe this company survived because I kept difficult people aligned. Elena closed the door behind her. And now? A faint smile crossed his reflection in the glass. Now I'm wondering whether I simply kept dangerous people close. Finally, he turned toward her. No performance remained in him now, no executive polish, just a man standing inside consequences arriving faster than expected. He gestured toward a folder resting on his desk. I need you to review something before legal does. Elena didn't move yet. What is it? Gregory held her gaze for several long seconds, then answered with the kind of honesty powerful men usually discover too late. The document that explains why Martin believed he could bypass your signature authority in the first place? The rain outside intensified again, striking the windows harder now like impatient fingers demanding entry. And for the first time since the transfer froze, Elena realized the truth might be uglier than fraud, because fraud implied greed. But what she suddenly saw in Gregory Shaw's face looked much closer to fear. The folder on Gregory's desk contains the one agreement nobody at Blackmere was ever supposed to read twice. Gregory Shaw's office smelled faintly of cedar, old paper, and the kind of expensive silence money buys after decades of winning. Rain battered the windows harder now, blurring the river outside into streaks of gray mercury. The city looked submerged beneath weather and secrets alike. Somewhere far below, traffic crawled through wet intersections while entire careers trembled 32 floors above ground. Elena approached the desk slowly. The folder waiting there was thin, too thin. In corporate disasters, the smallest files were often the deadliest. One paragraph, one signature, one clause buried beneath harmless language. Entire empires had collapsed over less. Gregory remained standing near the window. I never intended for this to happen, he said quietly. Elena looked up at him. That sentence usually arrives very late. A tired smile crossed his face. Yes, he admitted, it does. She opened the folder. Inside rested a private governance agreement dated 9 months earlier. Confidential Executive Contingency Protocol. The title alone made her pulse cool. Her eyes moved carefully across the text. Legal formatting, internal references, emergency authority provisions, temporary execution pathways during leadership instability events. Then she reached the paragraph that mattered. In the event protected shareholder authorization becomes inaccessible, obstructive, or non-cooperative during strategic transfer execution, temporary authority may be reassigned under chairman discretion, pending post-closing ratification. Elena read it twice, then a third time. The room became very quiet. Outside, thunder rolled somewhere over the river. This language is intentionally vague, she said at last. Gregory exhaled slowly. Martin drafted it. Yet you signed it. The chairman closed his eyes briefly. And there it was. Not corruption, fatigue, the dangerous exhaustion of powerful people who spend too many years solving emergencies by making exceptions. One shortcut. One compromise, one temporary solution after another, until the structure beneath them no longer resembles rules at all. He told me the market window wouldn't stay open? Gregory said. That delays could trigger losses, investor withdrawals, instability. Elena looked back at the document. And you believed procedure was flexible? I believed control was. That answer carried more honesty than comfort. The rain intensified again, hammering against the glass walls in restless waves. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The office lights reflected across polished wood and framed awards, turning the room into a museum dedicated to decisions nobody could undo. Elena closed the folder carefully. This agreement doesn't override the shareholder protection addendum. We know that now. No, Gregory knew that now, which meant Martin probably knew it much earlier. That realization settled heavily between them, because there was a difference between negligence and strategy. And Elena was beginning to understand which one she was dealing with. A sharp knock interrupted the silence. Gregory's assistant entered looking unusually pale. Board Counsel has completed preliminary review. Nobody moved. The assistant swallowed carefully. They want the executive committee reconvened immediately. Of course they did. Once legal departments sensed structural liability, meetings multiplied like fractures in ice. Gregory rubbed one hand across his jaw. Who's with them? External counsel? Audit oversight? 2 independent directors. That mattered. Independent directors rarely appeared unless risk had escaped containment. The assistant hesitated. And Martin Kessler brought personal representation. Elena's eyes narrowed slightly. Personal representation, not company counsel. Personal. Interesting. Very interesting. Gregory noticed her reaction immediately. You think he's protecting himself? I think he started protecting himself before anyone else realized protection was necessary. The chairman looked suddenly older again. For the first time since she'd known him, Elena saw something close to regret settle visibly across his face, not because the transfer failed, because he finally understood who had been steering the ship during the storm. The boardroom at noon no longer resembled executive leadership. It resembled impact before collision. No catered breakfast remained now, no polished presentation screens. The lights felt harsher somehow, exposing every exhausted expression around the table. Legal binders covered nearly every surface. Coffee cups accumulated beside stacks of compliance reports like evidence from a sleepless war. When Elena entered beside Gregory, conversation stopped immediately. Martin sat near the far end of the table with a private attorney beside him. Immaculate suit, perfect posture, but something colder lived beneath the surface now. Calculation under pressure, and pressure had finally become visible. Board Counsel began without delay. Our review indicates procedural inconsistencies extending beyond the current share transfer authorization dispute. Corporate language again, soft shoes, sharp knives. One independent director leaned forward. Define inconsistencies. The attorney adjusted his glasses. Unauthorized contingency mechanisms appear to have been drafted to bypass protected signature authority under specific transactional conditions. No one spoke for several seconds. Rain rattled faintly against distant windows. Martin finally broke the silence. The contingency framework was preventative, not deceptive. Elena almost admired how smoothly he lied. Almost. Board Counsel opened another file. Preventative frameworks generally require disclosure. Martin's attorney intervened immediately. There was no execution of those provisions? Not yet, Elena thought, but she remained silent. Because silence now worked in her favor far more effectively than confrontation. Gregory cleared his throat heavily. I approved the contingency language. Several heads turned toward him instantly. The room shifted again. Not explosive. Worse, disappointed. Executives could survive greed more easily than weakness, and Gregory's admission carried the exhausted weight of both. Martin spoke carefully. The chairman acted under strategic necessity. No, Gregory interrupted quietly. That surprised everyone, even Elena. The old chairman removed his glasses slowly and placed them onto the table with deliberate precision. I acted because I allowed urgency to replace judgment. The room froze. For years, Gregory Shaw had been known as a man who never admitted mistakes publicly. Watching him do it now felt almost surreal, like seeing a monument apologize for collapsing. Martin's composure cracked for the first time. With respect, Gregory, we all agreed the timeline. I agreed to pressure, Gregory said sharply, not manipulation. Silence detonated afterward, because now the fracture line stood fully exposed, and everyone in the room could finally see which side each person occupied. Martin leaned back slowly in his chair, studying the table instead of the people around it. Dangerous. Very dangerous. People became unpredictable the moment they realized loyalty had expired. Board Counsel slid another document across the table. Recovered email logs. Elena recognized the subject line instantly. Signature authority contingency. Martin's attorney reached for the pages first, but Martin stopped him with one subtle movement. Then he looked directly at Elena. Not angry anymore, something colder. You knew exactly when to send that email, didn't you? Her voice remained calm. I knew exactly when procedure stopped being optional. Another silence. Outside, lightning flashed briefly through the clouds, illuminating the boardroom windows in cold white light. Martin gave a short laugh without amusement. 12 years, he said softly. 12 years of cleaning up everyone else's disasters? And this is how they reward you? Elena understood the trap immediately. He wanted emotion now, resentment, conflict, anything that shifted the room away from documents and toward personalities. She refused. This isn't about reward, she replied evenly. It's about accountability. And just like that, the room returned to him. Not to his authority, to his exposure. The attorney beside Board Counsel closed the final folder carefully. Pending full investigation, all transfer actions remain suspended. Additionally, the committee recommends temporary restrictions on executive authorization privileges connected to the original transaction. Martin stared at him. You're suspending me? No, the attorney answered carefully. Your access. That distinction landed harder because power inside corporations rarely disappeared dramatically. It vanished quietly, one password at a time, one approval revoked, one assistant suddenly refusing eye contact. Martin stood slowly. Nobody stopped him. Nobody defended him. That may have been the cruelest moment of all. He adjusted his cuffs automatically, a habit searching desperately for normalcy, then looked around the room like a man realizing the architecture itself had shifted beneath him. His eyes settled briefly on Gregory, then Elena. You think this ends here, he said quietly. No one answered, because everyone suddenly sensed the same thing. The frozen transfer was only the surface, and somewhere beneath months of altered approvals and hidden contingency agreements, something larger still waited to be uncovered. Martin left the boardroom without another word. The door closed softly behind him. Softly, but the silence afterward felt enormous. Then Naomi's voice appeared from the far end of the table, small but unsteady. There's one more archive recovery legal hasn't reviewed yet? Every head turned toward her. She looked terrified, and Elena instantly knew whatever came next was worse than the transfer itself. The final recovered file doesn't expose the deal. It exposes why the deal had to happen before quarter end at any cost. The rain finally stopped at 14:43. Not dramatically. No burst of sunlight, no cinematic clearing of skies. The storm simply exhausted itself above the city, leaving behind wet streets and low clouds drifting between towers like smoke after a fire. Inside Blackmere Capital, the silence felt stranger than the weather. People spoke carefully now, doors closed softly, entire departments moved with the cautious politeness of passengers aboard a damaged aircraft pretending not to notice turbulence. Elena stood alone in the executive records office while Naomi uploaded the final recovered archive to legal's secured review system. Fluorescent lights reflected across metal cabinets and cold monitors. Somewhere nearby, printers worked non-stop, spitting out documents that smelled faintly of toner and consequences. Naomi's hands shook slightly above the keyboard. I almost deleted this, she admitted quietly. Elena looked up. Why didn't you? Naomi gave a weak laugh. Because I realized everyone else already tried. That answer lingered heavily in the room. Outside the glass partition, legal teams crossed the corridor carrying sealed folders. Nobody smiled anymore. Blackmere had entered the phase every corporation feared most. Not scandal, not headlines, but internal recognition. The moment employees understand leadership may not survive intact. Naomi clicked open the final archive. A spreadsheet appeared first. Then projections, debt structures, liquidity schedules. Elena's eyes narrowed slowly as the numbers aligned. Quarter-end exposure, covenant pressure, hidden collateral instability, and suddenly the frozen share transfer revealed its real purpose. It had never been about expansion. It had been about concealment. Blackmere Capital was bleeding liquidity far faster than investors understood. Several over-leveraged positions had deteriorated quietly over 2 quarters, and unless the transfer executed before reporting deadlines, the company would be forced to disclose severe balance sheet instability. The room felt colder. Naomi whispered the conclusion neither of them wanted to say aloud. They weren't protecting growth. No, they were protecting valuation. Protecting stock confidence, protecting themselves? Elena continued scanning the files carefully. The deeper she read, the uglier the architecture became. Temporary debt masking? Deferred exposure classifications? Internal projections designed to survive exactly 1 more quarter before collapse became unavoidable. And every path toward survival depended on the transfer closing immediately. That was why Martin panicked, why Gregory compromised, why version 11.2 existed at all. The transfer wasn't greed accelerated by ambition, it was desperation disguised as strategy. A quiet knock interrupted the room. Board Counsel entered alongside 2 external auditors. Their expressions carried the rigid calm of professionals, already preparing for catastrophe. We need copies of everything, one auditor said. Naomi looked pale again. Elena simply nodded. The auditor placed another document on the desk. Formal emergency governance notice. Temporary executive oversight measures effective immediately. Which meant one thing. The board had stopped treating this as a procedural issue. Now they were treating it as a containment event. Outside, clouds shifted slightly above the skyline, letting weak afternoon light spill between buildings. The city looked washed clean, while Blackmere itself seemed to darken from within. One of the auditors reviewed the projection sheets in silence, then stopped abruptly at a highlighted section. What is this? Naomi leaned closer. Her face drained of color instantly. Elena read the line next. Contingent liquidation trigger tied to failed transfer execution. For a moment, nobody spoke, because they all understood simultaneously. If the share transfer failed permanently, Blackmere wouldn't just face embarrassment. It could trigger covenant reviews, investor panic, regulatory scrutiny, potential collapse. The company had been balancing on thin ice long before Elena sent her email. She had simply revealed the cracks before everyone else fell through them. The auditor removed his glasses slowly. Who else knew? No one answered immediately, because the truthful answer was suddenly horrifying, probably more people than anyone wanted to admit. Elena stepped toward the window overlooking downtown. Sunlight finally touched the wet streets below, turning puddles into scattered mirrors across intersections and rooftops. The city moved normally beneath them, unaware that one of its most powerful firms stood quietly at the edge of implosion. Behind her, Board Counsel spoke in low, urgent tones with the auditors. Words drifted through the room. Disclosure obligations, interim review, executive liability, emergency governance authority, the vocabulary of institutional survival. Her phone buzzed softly. Unknown number again. 3rd time. Elena answered without speaking. This time the voice sounded older, male, controlled. You should leave the building before 6. The line disconnected immediately. Naomi looked up from across the room. Who was that? Elena stared at the dark phone screen. I'm starting to think, she said quietly, there are still people here trying to decide which side they're on. And that was the real danger now. Not Martin, not Gregory. Fear. Fear spreading through executive offices, legal departments, investor relations teams, and private inboxes all at once. Fear made people unpredictable. It erased loyalties and rewrote memories. It turned assistants into witnesses and partners into liabilities overnight. At 1612, the emergency board session resumed for the third time that day. But the atmosphere had changed completely. Nobody defended the transfer anymore. Nobody discussed strategy. The conversation now centered around exposure, preservation, disclosure timelines, and executive accountability. Like surgeons discussing how much damage could still be contained after discovering the infection had already spread. Martin returned 20 minutes late. No assistant followed him this time. No attorney either. He entered the room carrying only a slim folder beneath one arm and the exhausted expression of a man who finally understood he could no longer negotiate with momentum. The board barely acknowledged him. That hurt more than hostility would have. He took his seat quietly. Across the table, Gregory Shaw looked years older than yesterday morning. The chairman's legendary composure had thinned into something fragile and deeply human. Board Counsel began outlining emergency recommendations, independent oversight, transfer cancellation review, disclosure preparation, temporary suspension of select executive authorities. Each sentence removed another brick from the structure Martin once controlled. Then the attorney reached the final recommendation. Pending investigation completion, the committee advises immediate preservation of all executive communications and financial authorization records. Martin finally spoke. One email, he said softly, almost to himself. Nobody interrupted. His eyes drifted toward Elena. One email froze everything. She met his gaze evenly. No, she replied. One email revealed everything. The silence afterward settled across the room like dust after collapse, because everyone knew she was right. The transfer did not destroy Blackmere, the truth did. And truth inside corporations rarely arrived dramatically. It arrived quietly, attached to emails, buried in timestamps, waiting inside backup servers while executives convinced themselves procedure was flexible. Outside the windows, evening light spread slowly across the skyline in muted gold. Beautiful in the way fragile things sometimes are moments before they disappear, Martin leaned back at last, staring toward the darkening city. For the first time since this began, he looked less like a predator and more like a man stranded beside the ruins of his own certainty. Gregory broke the silence quietly. What happens now? Board Counsel answered with brutal professionalism. Now, he said, we document everything. And somewhere deep inside Blackmere Capital, hidden beneath years of polished presentations and confident forecasts, the machinery of accountability finally began to move.